Well, do you mean, did he have any nickisms? He had some of those. There's a point where he's saying, you know, they took my baby girl, they ripped her head off, and they ate it with a butter knife. And I'm sitting at Video Village with Patrick, the director, and Mike DeLuca, the producer, and we just sort of take a moment, stare at each other, and I'm whispering, and I'm like, did he say eat it?
It's 2011, and many of the studios believe they have found the secret formula for box office glory, an additional dimension. The first 3D film was screened in the 1920s, titled Power of Love. The film has since been lost to history. However, there's a 1922 account from the publication The Billboard, titled Stereoscopic Method of Projecting Motion Pictures is Demonstrated, Many Advantages Claimed. At the event at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, 600 guests gathered to view the new marvel, with the inventor of 3D, Harry K. Farrell, presiding. In the first-hand account, the Billboard writer was endlessly fascinated by the inner workings behind the illusion. The picture is obtained by the projection on the screen simultaneously of two positive films superimposed, photographed at the same time through a single camera having two lenses, separated about the same distance as the human eyes. The films are chemically treated in such a way as to allow a perfect view from any distance as well as any angle. Each member of the audience was presented on entering the theater a pair of spectacles, having one lens red and the other blue. With the naked eye, the screen produces only a blur of blue and red color and cannot be recognized as a picture. But once placing the glasses on the eyes, a much different thing is revealed. The screen seems to disappear entirely, and instead a living reality of the screen itself appears. It gives you much the same effect as looking through a window upon nature itself. One feels as though he could just reach over and pick the flowers, even speak to men and women that appear. We do not know at this writing just how soon the public will have the opportunity of viewing this new invention and novelty, but when it comes, it doubtless will gain instantaneous favor. This did not come to pass, and 3D mostly faded away, but its rise in popular culture began again in the 1950s. The movie industry was doing everything it could, just as it is now, to keep people off their televisions and out of their homes and get them back into theaters. And one of their gimmicks happened to be the 1920s invention of 3D. One of the biggest hits from the period was House of Wax, which also reveals the gimmicky nature of the 3D medium that has often plagued it. In the same film about a mass murderer putting his victims on public display, a barker attempting to get passerbys into the House of Wax breaks the fourth wall and displays his paddleball skills.
Well, there's someone with a bag of popcorn. Close your mouth. It's the bag I'm aiming at, not your tonsils. Here she comes. Well, look at that. It's in the bag. See the lovely sinners of ancient times, ladies and gentlemen. Beauties who died in torture and on the block.
House of Wax was a gigantic hit. It earned $23 million, and if you adjust for inflation, that makes it number 107 on the highest-grossing films of all time. For some perspective, it ranks ahead of The Lost World, Jurassic Park, and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. However, 3D could not capitalize on House of Wax. In 3D Revolution, the history of modern stereoscopic cinema, Ray Zone notes that the main reason for 3D's fall in the 50s was the rise of CinemaScope, which tripled the size of movie screens, and movie houses chose this over 3D. And secondly, the quality of 3D films were generally trashy exploitation pictures, instead of historical epics like The Robe. Not to mention the cameras were difficult to shoot with, and so was the projection of the films. But 3D film wasn't dead. Single-strip 3D film was invented in the 1950s, but it wasn't until the 1980s that it was put into widespread practice. The single strip made it much easier to shoot on set, and easier to screen in theaters. Studios took advantage of this by returning to the horror genre, with Friday the 13th 3D, Amityville Horror 3D, and Jaws 3D. These films did well enough, but critically they were slammed, which led to 3D falling off the map once again. 3D was still waiting for its brief day in the spotlight, waiting to be elevated beyond its paddleball past. That day would come from the cinematic innovator, James Cameron, who would bring his childhood-long dream to the screen, Avatar, which became the highest-grossing film in history, not accounting for inflation, grossing $2.78 billion. Whatever Avatar's story may have lacked was made up in visuals that the world had never seen. It was finally the once-in-a-lifetime experience that 3D had always promised. In fact, it was too much for some people. CNN covered the fallout. James Cameron's completely immersive spectacle Avatar may have been a little too real for some fans, who say they have experienced depression and suicidal thoughts after seeing the film, because they long to enjoy the beauty of the alien world Pandora. Industry insiders, according to Film Comment, were referring to Avatar as the jazz singer of 3D, the one hit that will shift the paradigm forever. And because 3D had the benefit of higher ticket prices, studios wanted to cash in on the trend, but began to focus on quantity instead of quality. Many of the films to follow in Avatar's footsteps were not shot in 3D, but in 2D, and then up-converted to 3D. That includes the next big 3D hit, Alice in Wonderland, a 3D that completely lacked the state-of-the-art quality of Avatar. Instead, it came off like the 3D from the 1980s. In 2007, there were only 6 3D releases. By 2016, there were 52. Even television wanted a piece of the action and made 3D TVs, and ESPN launched a 3D channel in 2010. However, Disney would pull the plug on the channel only after 3 years. 3D's popularity has continued to fade into obscurity. Once a strong selling point, it has become a nuisance to viewers. Even IMAX is quietly exiting 3D, according to QZ. IMAX shift comes as the exhibitor missed badly on earnings during the second quarter of 2017, thanks to cinema letdowns like Transformers: The Last Knight and The Mummy. Consumers in many markets are showing a clear preference, said Greg Foster, the CEO of IMAX, on a conference call yesterday. It's apparent that the demand for 2D film is starting to exceed that of 3D in North America, and we'll be looking to keep more of our films in 2D as a result. While this was happening, one of cinema's biggest stars had fallen on hard times. Nicolas Cage was the $40 million a year man, making about 2 pictures a year for a period of time. Then in 2009, things went belly up when he filed for bankruptcy, owing the IRS $6.3 million in property taxes. His lavish spending was chronicled by the press as the pinnacle of wealthy excess. His purchases read like a Robin Leach rant. He bought the Lussier mansion in the Big Easy, also a private island, and a 9-foot pyramid tomb to bury himself in. Also a pet octopus, a T-Rex skull, which eventually had to be returned to the Mongolian government because it was stolen. To be fair to Nicolas Cage, he also donated $1 million to the victims of Hurricane Katrina. Cage was forced to start making movies at a clip pace. By 2016, the LA Times reported that Cage had 3 movies hitting theaters in the space of 2 weeks, and 5 more movies currently slated to come out the same year. Needing money, most actors would look to make a mainstream hit, maybe go back to the well for a crowd pleaser, and make The Rock 2, or another national treasure. But not Nicolas Cage. He picked Drive Angry 3D, the story of a man who breaks out of hell to save his granddaughter from an evil cult leader. A film which he'd drink beer from the skull of an enemy and have a gunfight in the throes of carnal knowledge. It could have been a movie written by Cage himself, but it was written by the like-minded Todd Farmer and directed by Patrick Lussier.
I started years ago in Vancouver, where I'm from, and working as an assistant editor on a HBO show back in 1986 called The Hitchhiker, which was really just yuppies run amok, an excuse for gratuitous violence and nudity in a 28-minute format. So I started as assistant editor on that, and then became a first assistant on the original 21 Jump Street. From there, went on to MacGyver, and then worked on a little TV series with Wes Craven that lasted 6 episodes called Nightmare Cafe. And Wes was like, I want you to cut my next feature. And we stayed in touch. And 2 years later, that was Wes Craven's New Nightmare. I learned a lot from Wes. I mean, I worked for Wes for, I guess, over 20 years. And when I was moving into directing, he gave me some great advice. A lot of it was, partly from watching him. Wes always would shot list everything, have a plan for every single day of photography, every single scene, and it would all be distributed to the entire crew so that everybody could see that there was a plan to get them home at the end of the day. That was a direct paraphrase quote from Wes when he had told me that, and, wear comfortable shoes, which is great advice. And remember that you're the director. People are looking to you for the plan. You actually have a lot of influence over how things go, and the importance of collaboration, that you really want to hire people who are really good at their jobs. Don't do the thing where you hire people better than you so you can look smarter. Hire people smarter than you so that you can help them shine and they'll help you do the same thing. What really gave me my chance to direct in my end was the opening sequence of Scream, the Drew Barrymore sequence. And when the daily started being viewed in New York, the suits hated it. They called Wes and they were threatening to fire him and threatening to bring in another director. They were sending him dailies of another director's movie. Wes was so upset, and I said, I don't know what to talk about. This is all great. So I cut it together, and I learned very early on by an editor who gave me my first job at MacGyver, who said, you cut with your gut, not your head. And it was a feeling. It was literally feeling the sequence. It wasn't overthinking it. It wasn't trying to analyze it about how it worked. It was feeling the emotional content. The two editors who gave me my big breaks, Mike Elliott and Michael Robeson, they both just said, if it's a tense scene, you have to be on the edge of your seat. If it's an emotional scene, you have to be on the verge of tears. You have to feel it. And you can always tell somebody who's been cutting with their head as opposed to their heart, because it feels like there's a lot of hesitation. There is no hesitation. We got the last day of dailies on the Monday after the Friday that they shot for that 5-day sequence. It was cut on Tuesday and in Wes's hands Tuesday night to watch. There was no doubt about what the sequence was. And Wes had done a great job in directing it, and it was brilliantly directed, and it was incredibly well written by Kim Williamson. And performance, Drew's performance is wonderful and terrifying. So it was not hard to find. It was, you just sort of threw it up in the air and it was cut before it hit the ground. I often will get to an end of the sequence that I've edited and have no idea how it got there. You can go to the other side and go, well, I guess that's what it is. Magic that happens. That's what happened. And shipped it off to New York, and they watched it and called up and said, oh my God, we are so wrong. This is everything we'd hoped for. This is exactly what we want. What else can we give you to make this better? And that 13 minutes is what basically gave me every opportunity to direct and go forward and cut other films for the company. And, it all came out of that.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
Halloween. The one with the guy in the white mask who walks around and stalks babysitters.
Yeah.
What's yours?
Guess.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Is that the one where the guy had knives for fingers?
Yeah, Freddy Krueger.
Freddy, that's right. I like that movie. It was scary.
Well, the first one was, but the rest sucked.
So, you got a boyfriend?
Why? You want to ask me out on a date?
Maybe. Do you have a boyfriend?
No.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
What did you say?
After finishing Scream 2, I'd been approached about, maybe going to edit for different companies and things like that. And Andrew Rona, who was an executive there at the time, came to me and said, hey, what if we gave you a chance to direct? Would you stay and maybe cut Halloween H2O for us? I thought, sure, yeah, I'd always wanted to direct it. I kept that pretty quiet. And they said, well, we do these direct-to-video things, and it'd be a good place for you to start, and, watch these prophecy movies and see what you think. And I thought that, there's a really fun franchise. I thought Greg Wyden did a great job of the first one, especially. I got along really well with Joe Sasson and Keith Porter, the producers of those films. And we came up with a really fun screenplay that 5 weeks or 4 weeks before production, Dimension Film said, hey, what we want you to do is take this character that has one line and make her the main character and get rid of all this other stuff. And it just, I remember Joel turning to me and said, a good lesson for you to have as a director is you have to love every mutant child. It was the first of many experiences with Dimension Films. You pitched them something that they would absolutely love, and by the time you got around to making it, you had completely fucked it. And as they had said to me once, when it's your money, you can do what you want. It's our money, do what we tell you. Like, all right, I got a mortgage to pay, I've got mouths to feed, and I will go forward and make the best version of this that I can possibly make with resources that I have been graciously given.
The story that began in the prophecy.
You don't just stand there straight-faced and tell me he walked right out of here. You don't do that.
And took a frightening turn in the prophecy, too.
Do I know you?
I know you from before you were born, both times.
Has opened a new chapter.
You more than anyone know what he is. He's their last hope.
Are you ready? Christopher Walken.
It's gonna be a long day.
Vincent Spano.
I'm not afraid of you.
You should be.
It was an exchange. So I cut Halloween H2O, direct Prophecy 3, and then it became and edit Music of the Heart and edit. It was like you made a deal with Darth Vader where they just kept saying, pray we don't alter it further. Yeah, I was very grateful for the opportunity, and they were very kind to give it to me. And as they had said to me at that time, we're more than happy to have you direct for us, and we will certainly kick your ass. And they were, very true to that.
The Friday the 13th franchise, which began in the 1980s, had laid dormant for 9 years, after 1993's ninth installment. Even Scream's popularity in 1996 couldn't resurrect this slasher. Luckily for Jason Voorhees, who had already taken a trip to hell, writer Todd Farmer had another destination in mind.
Straight out of high school, even before high school, I wanted to tell stories. I thought I wanted to write novels. I didn't have the patience. After college, I found a book. You remember bookstores when those were like big? There's a bookstore that had a Quentin Tarantino collection of just a bunch of Tarantino scripts, and I'd never seen a screenplay before. And I was struggling with this novel, and I read the screenplay, and it was like, wow, I mean, I can write that easy. Because for me, when I would come up with a story, I would lose interest after I sort of had it all worked out in my head. But with a screenplay, I mean, I can keep interest long enough to write that. So that's what did it. So I moved out to L.A. and I'd gone to college with a guy who dated a girl who was in theater with a guy named Dean Lorey, who had written Jason Goes to Hell and My Boyfriend's Back. And so he hooked me up with Sean Cunningham when I moved out here. And so that's sort of how it all started. I worked in Sean's maid's room for about 3 years, writing everything that wasn't horror. And that was my start. I'd been there about 3 years working for Sean. We were writing everything outside of the horror genre. We wrote delinquent kids in Spanish Harlem and, courtroom dramas. And I finally said to him, I said, I don't know any of this stuff. I'm just a dummy from Kentucky. I mean, horror I can write. I grew up watching it. So let's do that. And Freddy vs. Jason had been in sort of development hell for a long time. So he finally said, fine, you know what, let's do that. And so we started talking a standalone Jason movie. And Jim Isaac came in. He had been working he'd been with Cronenberg forever. And he'd done a couple of things for Sean in the past. And so we started kicking around ideas. The first thing that we really sort of gravitated to was sort of Jason in the Snow, but we never had a story for that. And then I had pitched them sort of a Blade Runner version where it took place far in the future so we wouldn't screw with whatever they were doing on Freddy vs. Jason. And it was expensive, and so that's what they said, we can't do that. And I said, well, what about Alien or Aliens? Because those had smaller budgets. And they said, yeah, we could do that. And so that's how it ended up in space.
In the year 2455, on a routine training mission, a team of students is about to discover a life form frozen in time.
Wow.
They're on their way back. Prepare for docking and power up the lab.
You brought him on board?
Everything's under control, ma'am.
What the hell is going on?
Jason Voorhees, that's what's going on.
The road from Prophecy to Drive Angry is about 10, 12 years between the two. Part of that was I would direct something and then I would go back to editing because I could pay my bills editing. And part of the thing that people may or may not know about directing is development takes forever. And Wes used to tell me is you need to have at least 10 different projects that you're developing at any one time. Because odds are none of them will go and it'll be something you're not expecting, but you just need to have something to do so you don't go crazy. And then went back to editing on something else, on Darkness Falls, and then that led to a directing job on a movie that would ultimately become The Messengers. At the time, it was called Scarecrow. That's where Todd Farmer and I met, and we just became fast friends.
We were on a movie called Scarecrow at the time. It was essentially The Shining on a farm. I had called my agent. I was broke, and I was like, is there anything out there? And she said, yeah, there's this thing. Everybody's gone in and pitched it. They didn't like anybody. It's still there. You can go in. You probably won't get it. So I went in, and I came up with a take that they'd never heard, which was basically the horror version of A Beautiful Mind. And that caught their interest. And basically, on the way home from the meeting, I got the job. I did a draft of that, and then Patrick was brought in to direct. And so we did another draft together, and then we both got fired. So, and that never happens in Hollywood. We were the only ones who'd gotten fired ever. And so then went into turnaround, ended up with Sam Raimi, and then got made as The Messengers. And then Raimi and team, a fellow named J.R. Young was working for him at the time, had reached out and said, I read your first draft. It's really awesome. What if we took that draft and made a prequel? And I was like, okay. And so I wrote one script and it made 2 movies. That never happens too. We pitched different things. We came up with a crazy and ludicrously expensive ghost story that all took place underwater that we went out and pitched and had several people interested, but they were like, this will bankrupt our company. And then after that, one of the days I was showing that cut to Mike Pasternak and Peter Block when he was still at Lionsgate, was the day they closed the deal on the rights for My Bloody Valentine. So when I walked in the room, they're like, hey, do you want to direct the remake of My Bloody Valentine? And my answer was, of course I want to direct the remake of My Bloody Valentine. And then, they started working on a script with Zane Smith, which I read and worked with Zane a little bit on. The script was a good script. It was just very different. It wasn't in a coal mine. It was in a pulp mine. The killer was a fireman. He wasn't a miner. It was a very different story. And they brought me in to keep all the good stuff that we loved about the original movie. My Bloody Valentine was the first one that actually took off. Patrick and I at that point became fairly inseparable when it came to our working together.
The original My Bloody Valentine was a Paramount picture, released in 1981. But unlike Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, or Friday the 13th, there wasn't a single sequel, despite the film being well regarded. However, by 2009, there would be a reboot.
Hey, do you want to shoot in 3D? Of course I want to shoot in 3D. I knew nothing about 3D. 3D was just sort of, the rumors of Cameron doing and redoing Avatar in 3D were well out there. The horror stories about what's going on in that, just technically, what a technical challenge it was. It's like, we'll figure it out. It's one of those things that if I knew then what I know now, would I have done it? So it's lucky I didn't know then. And Valentine was great. It was a real 3D experience. We shot it in native 3D with 3D cameras. The cameras at that time were about the size of a refrigerator, but got very excited about, what 3D looked like. How you could do it, especially in the native 3D. We did it with a company called Paradise Effects, which is no longer around. Max Penner, our stereographer who basically built the cameras and the rigs, the 3D rigs, would pull the stereo live while we were shooting. So like you have a focus puller, he would adjust the stereo so that if we were starting close in somebody's hand, you could make that hand come very far in the audience. And as you panned up, then you would sort of shrink the stereo out, stereoscopic effect. And it was a really beautiful medium to work in, and of course led itself to sort of the genre chicanery that you get up to, and the studio was always like, oh, you need to throw me some more things at the camera. It's just like, oh my God, if you throw it at the camera, you're just going to break it. You have to be a little more stylized with how you do that. So if you think there's a lot of those 2D gags in that movie, that was the compromise. Believe me, they wanted way more. They're like, oh, he throws a coffee cup. Can he throw it right at the camera? Can he do this? Can he do that? Maybe he can get a paddle ball like the old Dr. Tongue's 3D House of Pancake or House of Wax or something like that. And then Valentine, was a process every day. When we were shooting it, Brian Pearson, my director of photography at the time, would be like, I have no idea what this looks like. There's no way to tell. And I just saying to him, we have to keep going forward. It doesn't matter. We just have to get out the other side.
This January, prepare to witness.
What do you want?
The most frightening 3D motion picture event to tear through the screen. My Bloody Valentine 3D. Nothing says date movie like a 3D ride to hell.
Finished that film, and it played at Button-Umathon to great success. Then released on the MLK weekend in January 2009. Basically, at the time, Lionsgate was in the throes of being taken over by Carl Icahn. And if the movie had not done what it did that weekend, they would have lost the company. The fact that it was, had such a successful weekend, at the time, there was only like 900 3D screens. And we only got 3 weekends of 3D play because Coraline was coming in afterwards. You had to really plan, the strategy of when you came into the theaters. And Avatar wouldn't come out until December of that year, and this is January. So the fact that it did so well so quickly was a huge deal. We talked to them about doing a sequel, but at the time they had somebody new come in and take over the company.
Valentine was a hit. It was a big movie, and it was weird because some people were saying, that was a fad. It was just dumb luck because you had 3D, and we weren't getting a lot of job offers at the time. At the same time, all of these people who weren't giving us job offers were making 3D movies. It reminded me of what it was like during, probably right before Scream, because at that time, people didn't like horror movies, but then Scream came out and made I think the first weekend it made $6 million, and the next weekend it made $11 million. It just kept making more and more money. And suddenly everybody had a genre department making horror movies. They didn't call it horror, they called it genre because, they were still a little snooty. Same way with 3D. I think people didn't know what to do with it, and they didn't want to admit that, there was money to be made there. And so we were like, we need to have something else ready. So Todd and I were sitting around talking about what kind of movie, let's make another 3D movie. What would we do? And said, well, a car movie could be fun in 3D. And we started talking about Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry, Race with the Devil, and Vanishing Point, and all those movies that we grew up with as kids. And Patrick said, well, what about old, really dirty movies, road movies back in the 70s? And so we started looking at all of those. I'm like, that's really where it came from. What if you took those old car movies and turned those into a 3D movie? So we decided just to write a spec, and that's what happened. We wrote Drive Angry, and it was great. At the time, I was living in Pacific Grove, which is up around Monterey, and so we would chat online, and we would sort of break story that way. I would write, and then he'd call up with ideas, and then I would send him a draft, and he'd take a pass at it, and that's sort of how we did it. It was right around Groundhog Day in 2009 that we started coming up with the idea for what would become Drive Angry, doing a car movie, and then thinking, Race with the Devil, a car movie with cultists and Satanists, and maybe with Satan. Hey, that could be cool. Or, hey, maybe an agent of Satan, like Bill Murray, don't drive angry. And then we're like, no, it should be Drive Angry.
Don't drive angry. Don't drive angry.
And that sort of informed us of the direction that it would go and what the story would be and how the story would unfold. We talked basically in that first session, came up with the waitress character and Nick's character of Milton, and a reference to Paradise Lost, and then of course the accountant, which was modeled after Tommy Lee Jones in Fugitive. And it's like, what's a supernatural version of that? one thing led to another, and when we would write it, we would bounce pages back and forth as it evolved, and within 8 weeks, we had the first draft and sent it out.
This is the one thing that we wrote that we really didn't change a lot from writing it and selling it. We wrote it, and I think we made one tiny little character change to one of the characters, and then we went out and sold it. That normally doesn't happen. Normally there's rewrite after rewrite. Dry Anger was pretty raw going out. I mean, even it reads raw because, you know, it's just sort of the kind of movie it was.
And a number of producers were vying for it.
And so we met with tons of producers, and oddly enough, a lot of people really loved the script. And we had a lot of producers very interested. And then we had chosen the producer that we liked. One of the agents had reached out saying, you know, before you make a decision, you really need to meet with Mike DeLuca. And I had known Mike DeLuca from back during the Jason X days because DeLuca was running New Line at the time. But we went in to meet with him. It was love at first sight. He was quoting the script to us. He was, you know, we said, well, you know, because everybody else had, you know, this is what we want to do. And every producer we met with, they had like their take on it, how we should change it to make it work. And we said, so we were just expecting that. So we said to Mike, you know, okay, so what do you want us to do the script? And he was like, shoot it. So we were like, oh, okay. And so we immediately left the office and just were like, you know, we were like teenage girls jumping up and down, and we just met this boy that was so dreamy. And we called our agents and said, Mike's the guy. We're doing this with Mike.
Mike loved the script, could quote dialogue back from it, and had suggested Nick. He said, you know, given Nick's passion for cars and, you know, his love of Ghost Rider, and there were some echoes that he felt Nick would really like it. And he set up the meeting with Nick, who owed a movie to Millennium at the time, and so that's how we ended up there. And we had a great meeting with Nick, and he just thought this script is crazy.
Nick was reading the script, and I assume spoilers isn't a big thing because most of the spoilers were in the trailers. So Nick's reading the script, and around, I don't know, early on in the movie, he gets shot in the eye and killed. And so he stops reading at that point, reaches out to DeLuca and says, I'm in. So basically, because he got shot in the eye, that was Nick's entrance into the movie.
He had, I think he has said, he wanted to get shot in the eye with an arrow in Season of the Witch, and they wouldn't let him. And the fact that in Drive Angry, he would get shot in the eye. He felt this was something he was fated to pursue because that was a dream of his that he had had. And so signed on and was very on board with the shenanigans.
When I did Season of the Witch, I kept trying to get the producers to let me have one of my eyes shot out with an arrow. And they never quite got there. And for some reason, I had this passionate connection with having one of my eyes taken out as a character in a movie. And within the first 5 minutes of my conversation with Patrick, he said I was going to get one of my eyes shot out in the movie, and I went, okay, I'm making the movie. I'm in. Maybe it's something to do with like a Wotanic mythology or something.
And everything changed at that point because originally we went into this thinking, okay, Lionsgate will make a sequel to My Bloody Valentine. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create this little movie that can be shot for nothing. We'll shoot it for, you know, under $5 million. And we'll cast Betsy Brew, who was the naked girl who ran around for like 20 minutes naked in My Bloody Valentine. And we'll cast Tom Atkins, who's been in most of the stuff that we've done, as the Milton part. And we'll just, you know, we'll do it for nothing. And that was the original plan. And then it just sort of became bigger and bigger and bigger. And then finally when Nick came on, it became this huge thing. I got worried later. It didn't occur to me to get worried then.
In less than a year from coming up with the idea, we were in pre-production in Shreveport. The cameras had gotten so much better, so it was technically going to be a better experience and not so insane for everybody. Although we were going to be, you know, dragging these big cameras down the side of the road because we, again, shot at negative 3D and doing things like that, which was an exciting ordeal to be, you know, shooting the camera crane off the side of a truck, leading Nic Cage driving the wrong way through traffic. It was quite an exciting experience. You know, working with Nick, we would talk a lot about it leading up to it. You know, when we started prep in Shreveport, I would drive down to New Orleans to meet with him. We had a lot of different theories and different approaches on what the character looked like. And the first concept was very much to look like a Roy Scheider in the 7-Ups. That was, we even have big artwork that we did of that, of Nick with that look, with a big sort of leather jacket and things like that. For a while there, Nick was talking about shaving his head and getting a cool sort of flame tattoo all over his skull. And when we were talking about that, we sort of switched everything to this sort of lizard skin jacket sort of thing. And then, when we were talking to the studio and we were talking to Millennium and then talking to the producers and talking to Luca about that, there was a concern for a lot of different things. It was finally we decided there was a look we came up with for the film, this sort of Man in Black, Johnny Cash, blonde hair sort of version, based on if he looked like the Lizard Man, Amber Heard, Piper's character never picks him up. That relationship never starts. And that was the main catalyst for changing it. So from a character forceful thing of what each character needed to make it work. So we spent some time talking about, his voice, whether it was going to be really raspy, whether it was going to be like this, whether it was going to be like that. And he just rattled off, speeches from all over the script. And just, I could talk like this, or I could talk like that, or I could talk like... And we found, what the character became, which was, even though there's a lot of sort of cartoony elements of the film, his character is not really one of them. He's much, much more stoic than that.
And, Nick was great. He knew exactly what that character was from the very beginning. And I always thought, and I think I know Patrick did too, this was our version of High Plains Drifter, except in this situation, probably the accountant is the guy who materializes in the distance and shows up for the journey. I remember the moment he shows up on set, he absolutely knew every single line. I'd never run into that before. He had every line, and so he starts running these lines, back to me, and I'm just like, I'd never heard it. I mean, I wrote the thing, and I'm in the thing, and the day before we shoot, I'm struggling to learn my lines, and I wrote half of them, but he knew everything, so it was nuts. But he was funny because the script itself was filthy. I mean, the first 3 characters that you meet in the movie are fucking driver, fucking passenger, and fucking middle. That's their names. Everything about the movie was written to be filthy. And so he had come up and said, you know what? I'm not cussing in this thing. And I was like, but Nick, you're so good at it. He was like, I know. But his reasoning was, since everybody else is cussing, he felt like the guy from hell should be the one that doesn't cuss. And by the way, that's kind of brilliant. I didn't think of it. Patrick didn't think of it. Nick thought of it. He was wonderful to be around. Well, you mean, did he have any Nickisms? He had some of those. There's a point in the script where Nick broke out of hell. And so, but we never said that in the script. We never said those words. It was always one of those things. It was like High Plains Drifter. High Plains Drifter, Clint Eastwood never says, they killed me years ago and I'm back from wherever the hell I've been. He never said that. When we finally make the movie, the trailer comes out, and the first line in the trailer is, he broke out of hell. And we were like, but what? We did. That's a surprise. So anyway, there's a point where he's sitting at a fire and he's talking about what it's like to be in hell without actually saying I was in hell. And he says this line that, the worst part is that you see the suffering of the people that you love. There's like a video feed. It never turns off. You never see the happiness. You only see the horrible stuff. I watched this happen. I watched them take my baby girl, and he never finishes. But when Nick is acting it, Nick is like, they took my baby girl and they ripped her head off and they ate it with a butter knife. And I'm sitting at Video Village with Patrick, the director, and Mike DeLuca, the producer, and we're just sort of take a moment, stare at each other, and I'm like, did he say eat it? And because Nick is still going, because it's like this long monologue. And DeLuca's like, did he say butter knife? And then Patrick was just completely calm. And because he's an editor, and he looks at us and he goes, it'll come out in editing. He just goes right back to it. Didn't even faze Patrick. DeLuca and I are both white-faced, like, where is Nick going with this? But Nick would do that a lot, and that's okay. The great thing about Nick is, like I said, he knew every line. So the first take would be amazing, but it would be the take from the script. And as he played around, he would go into different tangents. And that's a great thing because we ended up using a lot of that. And one of those lines was, you know, I won't stop until I'm drinking beer out of Johnny King's skull. We didn't write that. That was Nick on the spot. And it was so fantastic that Patrick turned around to Gary Tunnicliffe, who was our effects guy.
And then it was just like, oh, well, we're so shooting that. And that moment from his add-on in that speech, and then we wrote that at the end and had the skull made, and everything of that. He was thrilled that we had embraced that part of his addition to the scene and to the character to make that moment. And that's an iconic moment when, you know, just drinking beer from your dead enemy's skull. Funny enough, we didn't get a lot of beer companies wanting to product place at that moment. I feel that was a huge missed opportunity on their part because who doesn't want to be part of that?
I think we only had like a week or so before we were going to shoot that scene. And he said, can you create a skull that Nick can drink beer out of? and Gary said, I'll do what I can. And so he took off, and I remember the day that we actually shot it, and, you know, Nick's pouring beer into it, and it was beer. And he's pouring the beer into it, and he's drinking it, and it's still got little slivers of I don't even know what it would be, whatever you make a fake skull out of, but it had little slivers of that in there that he was picking out of his mouth. He's like, we need to watch this thing. And he and Gary became really close friends, and so Gary was cracking up about it. I guess it was some sort of, it was, you know, plastic shavings or something from where they created the skull. But hey, I wrote a movie where Nic Cage drinks beer out of a skull, so I got that going for me.
I have a lot of fun memories of Nick on the film and just him being so open to some of the craziness we're up to. I think when we were shooting the opening scene, when he shoots one of the guys who are only known in the script as the fuckers, and the fucker at the beginning whose hand is shut off. And when I was talking to Nick about how that was going to work, and he just looked at me and said, I don't, you know, we do this. I don't think I'm going to be able to go back to romantic comedies. And I just said, dude, you knew this wasn't Family Man too. And he's like, you're right. Yeah. But he had that moment of, oh, I'm going to be doing that. Nick just had a really good sense of humor, and he was really good with everybody. You know, there'd be times when, you know, you go to Nick's Airstream because that's what he has for his trailer. And you know, you sort of talk about the character, talk about the day's work, and we talked about the schedule. Hey, we're going to have to adjust this and that. And just remember him saying, you know, whatever you need, I'm here for you and for the film. If you need me to stay late, if you need me to come in early, don't worry about, you know, what agents say or anything like that. You just talk to me and we'll make it happen. And he was just really on board with whatever he needed to make the movie good. But he was always, you know, incredibly respectful with the other actors, and it was all about whatever would make it work best for the movie, not just what's best for him.
Beer out of a skull? Sure, why not? But the film's other notorious scene involved a fully clothed Nicolas Cage, wearing sunglasses, mind you, banging it out with a local waitress.
Well, it certainly was Nick's idea to be fully clothed with a cigar and a bottle of Jack Daniels while having sex. And yeah, I remember him pitching that to me and saying, you know, I'm being nervous about it. You know, you think it's okay if I should be fully clothed, and I want to be drinking Jack Daniels, and I want to have a cigar, and and it's like, I wonder how Charlotte Ross is going to think about that. And then we came up with the line, "I never disrobe before a gunfight," and that sort of forgave it all. And it turned out to be an incredibly fun, kooky scene. It was the last thing we shot in the movie with Nick. And at the end of every shoot, at least at that time, he has KFC. So he finished his last shot and had some Kentucky Fried Chicken. I think he didn't think we'd do it. Because it was the last thing we shot, and the fact that, you know, when you push things off to the end, sometimes they don't happen. But You know, we spent 2 days shooting that mayhem, and I remember when we did ADR for it and him watching it for the first time, and he just couldn't stop laughing. He had such a good time. He just thought, oh my God, I can't believe this has actually been made. Nic also is physically, he's a really good actor and for what he can do. The fight with Jonah that he has at the end, you know, we had planned something very different, and then Nic came out and said, what if I kick him? What if I kick him a few times? And it's like, okay, yeah, you should kick him. He loved the moment when he was crawling on the ground and Jonah was hitting him in the back, and he was just covered in dirt and everything like that. And he just like, I'm just a lizard, just crawling through the, you know, crawling down from hell. And he loved those moments. It's funny, Rutger Hauer had told me years ago working with him, he said it's important to have a plan, and then it's important to work with the actor to find what the movie wants to be, to give them the room to play and create and be open to it. Everybody likes that you're prepared, but don't let your preparation destroy the magic that's waiting for you to find. And Nic presented a lot of magic. My biggest memory of Nic is that he was a total pro who was very kind and very prepared, and who made every moment that he was on set easier, not harder.
The thing that jumped out at me the most, and the thing that I tried to be the most aware of, is that, you know, Nic and, you know, a lot of celebrities at that level, they don't live in the world we live in. And I did my best not to push that envelope. Like, I kept seeing people going up taking pictures with him, and he was great about it. Always cordial. He was always very polite. But, you know, this is a guy who can't go to Target. He can't go where the rest of us go. One night, Patrick, DeLuca, myself, and Nic went to a restaurant in town. We were shooting in Shreveport, Louisiana, and it was a nice restaurant, steakhouse. The moment we sat down, you know, people are coming up and they're, you know, like, hey, Mr. Cage, can I get a photograph? Or Mr. Cage, can I get your autograph? Or you know, a lot of people are like, Nic! And so what was interesting is, you know, he was always polite. He was always very sweet, and he was signing autographs, and he would chat with them, and then we'd go back to talking what we were talking about, because we were talking about what we were going to do next, what the next movie is, and, you know, what we're going to order. But as the night went on, and when I say as the night went on, I'm like 20 minutes later, people are there, and they're getting more and more comfortable, and they're getting more and more drunk, and they start coming up, like one guy's coming up here, and he shoves his cell phone in Nic's face, and he's like, talk to my wife. She don't believe you're here. And so Nic's talking, yes, it's Nic, and he's talking to this lady. And then all of a sudden, it was like A Hard Day's Night. It was Beatles. It was everybody. We were completely surrounded. And I've never seen anyone more uncomfortable. It was just like, he looked at us and he was like, so we're done now, right? We're gonna. And so he was like getting up, and we were all like, yes, of course. And we're getting up, and we escort him out, and he leaves, because I don't know how you survive in that world. There's no anonymity. There's no, and it changes people. I mean, you know, we stood there in the parking lot because we didn't know how to take it, because we'd never been around it. And so we, of course, went back in and got all the food. And so went back to our rooms and ate steak in our rooms, which is fine. I think I certainly learned a newfound respect. And also I feel really bad for that level of celebrity that you just can't go out and be on your own.
On the final cut, I had a lot of control on the cut. What I didn't have control over was the visual effects. Glenn Neufeld, our visual effects supervisor, is an old friend, and he's really good and very talented. But the company that we were using was the company owned by Millennium, who had done 3D before. And they, you know, and I totally get that. They have an in-house company, save a lot of money for these kind of movies. But part of the problem is that they were also doing Conan at the same time. And that was taking a lot of their energy. You know, doing visual effects in both Shreveport and Sofia, you know, in Bulgaria, the challenge, because we were cutting in LA. So that was probably my biggest disappointment. Not in all of it, but some of it I felt didn't deliver what they could have. But other than that, you know, for the most part, the cut is very much what I had wanted. It was a great moment with Davidson, one of the producers, came into the cutting room, and I have tremendous respect for him. And at the time, the movie was a little long, and there was a lot of that sacred cows that we were hanging on to. It was like, oh, we love this moment, we love that moment. And Boaz turned to me and said, you know, Patrick, it is so hard to make one good minute of movie. Why do you want so many? And the next day I cut 7 minutes out. It was liberating to hear it put that way. Like, oh my God, we're trying to make all these moments work. Instead of making the moments that we know will work better and shoring them up, we're trying to make moments that maybe don't work as well work because of being in love with the process of shooting it, because of how hard it was or whatever. You know, Wes used to always say the reason the director's cut is like 10 weeks long is because you have to get to a point where you can beat the shit out of the movie, where you can divorce yourself from the process of shooting it and how hard it was to get it. Cut the movie to what it needs to be as opposed to what you wanted it to be. No, there's the movie you plan, the movie you shoot, and the movie you edit. It's sort of an old cliche that people say, and it's very true. And the hardest part is in each process, forgetting the previous process. Hey, we wrote this movie, we planned this movie. Oh shit! And on a daily basis, calamity happens, and it's like, okay, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this. How do you think on your feet? Have a plan so you can change it. Have a plan so that when things go wrong, you can make adjustments. The only thing that's in the movie that I wish wasn't in the movie is the very opening shot and voiceover talking about Nick escaping hell. That was never part of the original concept. You weren't supposed to find out until Piper found out. And that was very much a summit note. They wanted that in there. And myself and DeLuca and everything, we fought against that and lost. Ultimately, I really like the shots. I think they're pretty cool, and seeing how that way, I think is I like the fact that we made it sort of a horrible industrial park prison sort of thing. Yeah, I felt that it put the audience so far ahead of the character. And even when the movie was promoted, we were like, just don't promote it with he escaped from hell. And of course, the very first trailer they did, he escaped from hell. And it's like, oh my God, that was not how I would have done it. And I feel that, I believe the argument made at the time is, this is like promoting the Crying Game with a poster that says she's a dude. And that perhaps is not the way to do this. And we got told that we knew nothing about marketing. So there you have it. So, that was just the nature of that. Other than that, the cut is very much what I wanted it to be. We only cut out one scene. No part of the animal was wasted. I know when we previewed the movie, they asked questions of what are the other movies that you've seen? And a lot of the Nic Cage movies they would reference were his, like Family Man or Peggy Sue Got Married or whatever, which great movies. But they're not this movie. So that was like, it was just like, well, I think it would be better saying things like Gone in 60 Seconds or Ghost Rider as opposed to those. So the preview audience was fascinating because probably 70% of the movie people watching the movie really enjoyed it. They thought, what is this crazy film? And then there was 30% who were so offended and mortified, and just people would be like, oh my God, I can't believe he would make this Satanist thing and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was crazy. It is, as I said, it's not a 4-quadrant movie. It is very much of a certain era, time and place, that sort of grindhouse insanity. But, we try to make a little heart to it and emotionality to it at the end. It wasn't just a soulless driving guns and fucking movie. So ultimately, the movie, when it first came out, never found its audience. I don't know if it, will over time. That's you unleash it, and then it's in the hands of pop culture. But that was a little disappointing. I know to both Todd and I think Nick as well. Is that here was this thing that we had actually worked really hard on that didn't find a home in people's hearts the way it had in ours. So were we disappointed? Absolutely. At the same time, it still exists. It lives on. Do I wish more people had seen it and found it? Absolutely. So for whatever its shortcomings are, I think may deserve another look.
And this was right before the tracking became a big deal. So we didn't know it wasn't going to do well. Now, maybe there's some in the studio knew this, but Patrick and I didn't know. And so I was at Disneyland because I was like, you know what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to follow the numbers. I'm not going to read the trades. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just going to go relax at Disneyland because I love Disneyland. And I would be there right now if we weren't doing, no, I wouldn't be, but I would probably be there soon. So I was chilling out. And so around 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock that night, I reached out to Patrick because I hadn't heard anything. I said, hey, by the way, how are we doing? Fully expecting him to say, oh, we made 30 million, or we made 20 million, or we made 50 million. It never occurred to me that he would come back and say, it looks like it's about 5. And I was like, wow, 5 million for Friday night? I mean, what's that mean for the weekend? And he goes, no, that's 5 for the weekend. And I said, oh, okay. And so it was weird because we had a bunch of meetings set up for the following week, and those meetings went away. I've never experienced that before. It's like, so-and-so had to cancel. They're going to reschedule, but they need to wait and see what their calendar is going to be like. And so suddenly we had all of this stuff that just simply went away. So it was like, that was a weird place to be in. It reached a point where I think the audience was, Nick had a bunch of movies come out. I think the audience got a little burnt out of Nick. But for me, I mean, Con Air, you just got movie after movie after movie where he's just fantastic. And I still think he's fantastic. I never thought, I was never burned out by it. But, so for me, I was just like, this is it. I'll never do better than this. This is the moment. I had, my career was I never sold a script for $1 million. So my career was always, if I got one job a year, I was fine. Because one job a year would pay enough money to keep pay off the debts and keep the coffers full for a while, pay all the bills. And we still had, we had the Weinsteins, and, this is before we knew how touchy-feely they were. But we did a couple of gigs with them. They didn't get made, but it was enough to make a little bit of money. And we had a couple other places. DeLuca went out with us for a couple of different pitches. But, we weren't making movies. The movies had stopped. And so at that point, I had an ex-wife in Tennessee. My daughter was in Tennessee. And so I'd been flying back and forth as much as I could, and the money started to run out. And so it never became a thing where I said, I'm going to sleep in my car. It was like, I will tonight, and then I'll figure something out tomorrow. Okay, well, I will again, tonight. It'll be fine. And then I'd sleep on somebody's couch and then be back in the car. And then 6 months later, I'm like, okay, well, I'm doing this. 6 months, I'd turned my trunk into I had all my clothes folded and stacked properly. And I had a gym membership. And so I was, after work every day. And I had to pick up a regular job. So I was working at Toyota. That was the first regular job I'd had in, I don't know, 20 years probably, because every year I'd managed to write something to keep me in business, and that was the first year that I wasn't able to do that. And so I stayed in the Prius, which is far more roomy than you might expect. I stayed there for a little over a year, and I didn't tell anybody because how could you? I mean, how do you tell anyone that? Because one, it makes people feel guilty. And they feel like, well, what can I do? And I didn't want anything from anyone. I just wanted to get another writing job. And so I was working with Toyota. I was, calling customers every day. And I would charge my laptop. And then at the end of the day, I would go to the gym and I'd work out, take a shower. And then I would find a spot to park. And I'd sit in the car and write until my battery went dead. And I wrote a couple of things while I was there. I got a gig. It didn't pay a lot, but it was God of War. I don't know if you ever played the video game. God of War helped a little bit in that I was taking the video game and doing sort of a CGI version of the video game as a movie. Never got made, but it put a little bit of money in the bank. And then I got another writing gig, and I forget what it was at the time, but that was the one that allowed me to leave Toyota. I moved to Tennessee for a while so I could be near my daughter, and everything turned around at that point. But it was a tricky time. But the truth is, I never got that down about it. It wasn't ideal. I learned a lot, And I feel like I now have stories that I can tell that other people can't tell. So no regrets. It's just part of the journey. Think of this. So Patrick has the opportunity to work on Terminator. And so he's, and he told me this in advance. And I was like, yes, go do it. Go. Of course. Don't look back. Don't turn into salt. Just go do it. Because why wouldn't you do that? Of course, because the Terminator was huge for both of us. We both loved the whole series. The last thing I wanted to do was say, oh, and by the way, while you're doing this big movie, I'm sleeping in my car. Because, you know, if you're in production on anything, it's a freaking nightmare. Can you imagine being production on a huge Terminator movie? The last thing in the world I wanted to do was cause any stress, strain, or anxiety when it came to that. And so, you know, there were times that he would reach out and say, you know, this is what's going on, and this has happened, and this has happened, because, you know, we chatted a lot, and I never said a thing, never said a word to him, because it was, I just didn't want to derail anything. I wanted him to have a great, huge opening, and I wanted the experience to be without any stress for me. I mean, I was like that with everybody. But, yeah, I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell Patrick. I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want anybody to know, and I didn't want anybody to feel bad for me. I knew I'd get out of it, and I did.